The number $90,000 sits in a strange place in the American imagination. It's not rich, not by a long shot, but it's not poor either. It's supposed to be the sweet spot. The salary that means you've made it. You're comfortable, secure, financially stable. The kind of income that should let you buy a home, raise a family, save for retirement, and maybe even take a vacation without checking your bank account 3 times first. But for a growing number of Americans earning exactly that amount, something feels off. The math doesn't quite work. The security doesn't quite materialize, and the comfort that number is supposed to represent keeps slipping further out of reach. So here's the paradox. $90,000 a year puts you well above the median household income in most states. It's nearly triple the federal poverty line for a family of 4. By every official measure, you're doing well. And yet month after month, paycheck after paycheck, it doesn't feel that way. The money comes in and the money goes out, and what's left at the end rarely feels like wealth. It feels like survival with better furniture. So we need to ask some uncomfortable questions. How can a salary that should represent financial security instead feel like a tightrope walk? What exactly happens to $90,000 between the moment it hits your account and the moment it's gone? And what does it say about the economy when earning more than most people still doesn't feel like enough? Let's start with the number itself, $90,000 a year. Before anything else happens, before a single bill gets paid or a single purchase gets made, that number has to pass through the tax system. And the tax system takes its share first. Federal income tax pulls out roughly $10,000, depending on filing status and deductions. Social Security and Medicare taxes, the payroll taxes that come out regardless, take another $6,900. Then there's state income tax. In California, that's another $4,500. In New York, around $4,800. Even in states with no income tax, there are usually higher property or sales taxes waiting downstream. So before you've made a single decision about how to spend your money, somewhere between $21,000 and $25,000 is already gone. Your take-home pay, the actual amount you have to work with, lands somewhere around $65,000 to $68,000. That's the real starting point. Everything has to come out of that. Now let's talk about the biggest line item in nearly every household budget. Housing. The place you live is not optional. And in most of the country, it's not cheap either. The median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in the United States is roughly $1,400 a month. That's $16,800 a year. But that's the national average, which includes rural areas and small towns where housing is still relatively affordable. If you're earning $90,000, chances are you're working in or near a city where jobs that pay that salary actually exist. And in those cities, the numbers look very different. In Denver, median rent for a 2-bedroom is closer to $2,100 a month. In Seattle, around $2,300. In Boston, $2,800. In San Francisco, over $3,200. Let's take a middle ground and say you're paying $2,000 a month. That's $24,000 a year. Already, more than a third of your take-home income is gone. And we haven't furnished the place, turned on the heat, or paid a single utility bill. Now some people will say, why rent? Why not buy? And that's a fair question, except that buying has become functionally out of reach for most people earning $90,000. The median home price in the United States is now over $400,000. To afford that home under traditional lending standards, you'd need a down payment of at least $80,000 plus closing costs. Even if you somehow saved that amount, your monthly mortgage payment, including property taxes and insurance, would run around $3,000 a month in many markets. That's $36,000 a year, well over half your take-home pay. So for most people at this income level, renting isn't a choice. It's the only option, and it's eating up a quarter to a third of everything they earn. After housing, the next unavoidable expense is transportation. The United States is not designed for people without cars. Public transit exists in some cities, but for the vast majority of the country, if you want to work, you need a vehicle. And vehicles cost money, a lot of it. The average monthly car payment in the United States is now over $700. That's $8,400 a year just in financing. Then there's insurance, which averages around $1,700 annually. Fuel, depending on your commute, adds another $1,500 to $2,000. Maintenance, registration, occasional repairs, another $1,200. Add it all up and you're looking at roughly $13,000 a year, and that's for one car. If you're in a two-income household, which most are at this salary level, you probably need two, so double it. Now we're at $26,000 annually just to keep the household mobile. Our $90,000 salary, after taxes and housing and transportation, is now down to about $15,000, and we still haven't addressed healthcare, food, or childcare. Let's start with healthcare. If you're employed, you probably have access to employer-sponsored insurance. That sounds like a benefit, and it is, but it's not free. The average employee contribution to a family health plan in 2025 is around $7,200 a year. That's just the premium. That's before you've used the insurance for anything. Deductibles, the amount you have to spend out of pocket before insurance kicks in, average another $1,500 for individuals and over $3,000 for families. So even if you stay relatively healthy, healthcare is costing you close to $10,000 a year. One emergency room visit, one unexpected diagnosis, one prescription that isn't fully covered, and that number climbs fast. We're now at $5,000 left from our original $90,000, and we haven't fed anyone yet. Groceries for a family of four run about $1,000 a month if you're shopping carefully. That's $12,000 a year. We're now $7,000 in the red, and we still haven't paid for childcare. Childcare is where the budget doesn't just strain, it breaks. The average cost of full-time center-based childcare in the United States is over $10,000 per child per year. In cities, it's significantly higher. In Washington, D.C., it averages $24,000 per child. In Massachusetts, over $20,000. You have two young children and both parents work, which they have to in order to earn that $90,000. You're spending anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 a year just so you can go to work. At that point, the math stops making sense. One parent's entire salary might be going entirely toward childcare. But opting out isn't really an option either, because losing that income means losing the health insurance, the retirement contributions, the career continuity. You're trapped, you have to pay to work. So let's pause and take stock. We started with $90,000. After taxes, we had about $67,000. After housing, $43,000. After transportation, $17,000. After healthcare, $7,000. After groceries, we're negative $5,000. And we haven't paid for childcare, utilities, internet, phone bills, clothing, school supplies, or put a single dollar toward retirement, an emergency fund, or savings of any kind. This is not a story about irresponsible spending. This is not a household buying luxuries it can't afford. This is a household spending only on things that are required to function, and the budget has already collapsed. Now, some will argue that $90,000 is plenty if you just live somewhere cheaper. And that's technically true. If you move to a rural area or a low-cost state, housing drops significantly, but so do wages. The jobs that pay $90,000 are concentrated in expensive metro areas precisely because that's where the industries that support those salaries exist. You can't earn a San Francisco salary while living in rural Montana unless you're working remotely, and even that option has become less available as companies pull back on remote work policies. The salary and the cost of living are geographically locked together. You can't have one without the other. And that brings us to the real illusion. The illusion isn't that $90,000 sounds like a lot of money. It's that we still talk about it as if it represents the same kind of life it did 20 or 30 years ago. In 1990, $90,000 adjusted for inflation would be equivalent to about $210,000 today. A household earning that amount in 1990 could buy a home for roughly 2.5 times their annual income. They could cover healthcare costs that were a fraction of today's premiums. They could send kids to public universities where tuition was manageable. They had margin, room to save, space to make mistakes. Today, $90,000 buys you entry into the economy. It gets you to the table, but it doesn't get you ahead. The gap between what that salary can do and what people think it should do is the illusion, and it's widening every year. Let's talk about what's driving that gap. Three forces in particular: housing, healthcare, and education. All three have increased in cost far faster than wages and far faster than general inflation. Start with housing. In 1990, the median home price in the United States was about $120,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $280,000 in today's dollars. But the actual median home price today is over $400,000. Housing hasn't just kept pace with inflation, it's outrun it by nearly 50%. And in many metro areas, the gap is even wider. Meanwhile, wages have barely kept up with inflation at all. The median household income in 1990, adjusted for inflation, was about $63,000. Today, it's around $75,000. So while home prices have increased by over 40% in real terms, incomes have grown by less than 20%. The math has fundamentally broken. Then there's healthcare. In 1990, the average family health insurance premium was around $3,000 a year in today's dollars. Now it's nearly $27,000. That's a nine-fold increase in real terms. Employers cover most of it, but the employee share has still tripled. And that's just premiums. Deductibles, copays, and out-of-pocket maximums have all climbed even faster. The result is that healthcare has gone from a modest line item in the household budget to one of the largest fixed costs, right behind housing. And finally, education. In 1990, the average cost of tuition and fees at a four-year public university was about $2,000 a year. Today, it's over $10,000. At private universities, it's over $40,000. Even if you're not currently paying for college, the expectation that you'll need to save for it shapes household financial decisions for years in advance. And if you already have student loans, those payments can easily run $300 to $500 a month, another $6,000 a year gone before discretionary spending even begins. These three categories, housing, healthcare, and education, have consumed a growing share of household income for decades, and they're all relatively immune to the usual advice about cutting back. You can't negotiate your rent down by skipping lattes. You can't reduce your health insurance premium by buying generic cereal. These are fixed, non-negotiable costs, and they've grown faster than the income meant to cover them. So what happens when a household earning $90,000 can't make the budget work? They adapt, and not in ways that build wealth. They go into debt. Credit card balances have hit record highs. The average household with credit card debt now carries over $7,000 in revolving balances, paying interest rates that often exceed 20%. They delay major life decisions. Homeownership rates among younger adults have dropped. Birth rates have fallen. People are waiting longer to get married, longer to have children, longer to make any financial commitment that might reduce flexibility. And they reduce risk. They don't start businesses. They don't go back to school. They don't move for better opportunities, because all of those things require a margin of safety that $90,000 no longer provides. The result is an economy where people are earning more than ever in nominal terms, but feeling more financially fragile than previous generations did at lower income levels. And the data backs that up. The share of Americans who say they couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense has remained stubbornly high even as incomes have risen. The personal savings rate has fallen. Retirement account balances are lagging. By every measure of financial resilience, households are more vulnerable now than they were decades ago, even though they're earning more. That's the illusion. The number looks bigger, but the life it buys has gotten smaller. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't a temporary blip. It's not a recession or a market correction or a policy failure that can be easily fixed. It's structural. The cost of the things you need to participate in modern economic life, housing, transportation, healthcare, childcare, has risen faster than the income available to pay for it. And there's no sign that trend is reversing. So when someone says they earn $90,000 a year and still feel broke, they're not being dramatic. They're being accurate. The wealth that salary is supposed to represent has been eaten away by costs that didn't exist or didn't matter as much a generation ago. What's left is a paycheck that covers participation, but not security, survival, but not stability, and definitely not wealth. Because wealth isn't just about how much you earn. It's about how much is left after you've paid for everything you can't avoid. And for more and more American households, no matter what the number on the paycheck says, the answer is nothing. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Northville Institute. If this video made you look at a $90,000 salary a little differently, then you're seeing the difference between income on paper and life in reality. So until next time, I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.